On today's show, I react to the Ryan Reaves trade, the NHL's opening night scheduling debacle, and Easton Cowan being disrespected by high profile prospect analysts. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano. Dave Morisuti away today attending to a family emergency, so Dave will join us again tomorrow for our show. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. How we doing, Leafs Nation? Back off the weekend. And just a quick note for those who are listening to the podcast and are loyal listeners to the podcast. First of all, appreciate you guys. We thank you for being an everydayer here on the Locked On Leafs podcast. But moving forward for the rest of the summer, we shrank from 5 shows a week down to 3. So this week is when we started moving into 3 shows a week. So we'll have a show today. We'll have another show, I believe, Thursday and Friday this week. But typically, it'll be a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday schedule. So just a quick schedule change moving forward for those who are loyal listeners of the show, just to expect that to be the case. But we do go all summer long telling you guys the latest in Leafs Nation and around the NHL. And, well, it's the dog days of the summer, but still some things going on. And we obviously saw a big trade go down last weekend, or I think it was Friday last week for the Toronto Maple Leafs. It was right, a few hours after Dave and I signed off on the last podcast. It's funny, so we were talking about Ryan Reaves and his comments when he was on the Cam and Strick pod, said he wanted to get to 1,000 games in his career. And we came to the conclusion that, well, if he was going to do that, it wasn't going to happen here in Toronto. Well, he got his wish. He was dealt last week to the San Jose Sharks in exchange for Henry Thrun, a 24-year-old depth defenseman. So that was the trade. And, I think this is good for both parties. Like, ultimately, I think the Leafs, they get themselves a depth defenseman. I'll go in depth a little bit in a couple of minutes on who is Henry Thrun and what the Leafs got back for Ryan Reaves. But ultimately, Revo wanted to continue his NHL career, and it sounded like the Maple Leafs just weren't on the same page as Ryan Reaves at this point in his career. It sounds as though Toronto felt that he was no longer part of the equation for this team moving forward. They had signed Michael Pezzetta on July 1 for agency, kind of gives the team the same dynamic that Reeve could do, tough guy who could take a punch and throw a punch with the best of them. So he became rather meaningless. And when you're making $1.3 million on the cap, you probably don't want to keep that on your roster if you are the Maple Leafs. I know that they're not as cap strapped as they have been in the past. You could bury most of that contract in the minors, but it doesn't sound like Reeves had any intentions on going to the American League and would have liked to trade elsewhere if there was a spot available for him to try and compete for NHL minutes. And the San Jose Sharks, one of the worst teams in the NHL, they said, yeah, come on down. They could use a veteran and a good locker room presence within the Sharks locker room there. So they decided to make that deal, giving up Henry Thrun. And it was really interesting. Like Ryan Reaves, it was when he first signed in Toronto. I know that we came on this podcast for those who've been listening for the last couple of years, and we weren't fans of the deal when it first happened. Obviously, it was a 3-year deal at $1.3 million AAV, and both Dave and I were kind of flabbergasted that A, they had to give him that much money per year, and B, the fact that it took 3 years for him to actually sign. So the fact that there was multiple reasons not to really love the trade or love the signing when it officially happened. And then he started off just so horribly in his first few weeks as a Maple Leaf, and everybody just absolutely rolled their eyes and said, "We knew this was going to happen." All right, the guy is way past his days, and he was just slow, and I think he was like a dash 11 or something like that in the first month of the season. And then he got hurt and he came back and he played okay, played some games for the team. But ultimately, he never was a solid, nightly contributor for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, Ryan Reaves will be a footnote in Leafs history. This is obviously not a seismic deal of any magnitude like the Mitch Marner trade was. Obviously last month ahead of the NHL draft, or ahead of free agency rather. But still, you take a peek, and Ryan Reaves, still ended up playing a fair amount of games for Toronto, and there was some jabbing back and forth with the media. Sounds as though he was, a big part of this locker room. So there was some good that came with the Ryan Reaves experience here in Toronto, mainly off the ice, I would say, more so than on the ice. But it's now come to an end. He is going to be in San Jose. He'll be chasing 1,000 games. Still needs 88 games to get there, which means he'll have to return for a second season somewhere, whether it's in San Jose or elsewhere. He has to stay healthy all year and then latch on to another team next offseason and play out that contract and get, however many games are left to reach 1,000. But that's his goal. I'm not sold that he'll get there. I think he can get close, probably play some games this year, but I just don't see it happening. 1,000 games for Ryan Reaves seems a little too out of the scope for a 38-year-old who really just can't keep up with the modern day NHL anymore. I know he's going to a team that's probably going to end up bottoming out in the San Jose Sharks, but at the end of the day, you still are going to want to give your team the best chance it can to win games. And Ryan Reaves doesn't necessarily do that a whole lot, but they want to bring him in and kind of give him an opportunity and see what it looks like. In return, they end up getting Henry Thrun, who's a 24-year-old left shot defenseman who's accrued 160 games of NHL experience. Last year had a career high 14 points in 60 games, had 13 points the season before that. So you're not expecting a whole lot out of Thrun. He's depth, right? He could be this team's 7th, 8th, 9th defenseman. Probably, a guy who you can sneak through waivers potentially, and he ends up being on the Marlies' top line, perhaps. Maybe someone who gets picked up by another team looking for, a 7th defenseman. And that's kind of what it looks like he could end up becoming. There are some guys he knows within this organization, though, which I do find to be interesting. He spent the last couple of years in San Jose, but prior to that, he played collegiate hockey in the NCAA at Harvard University and was actually on a defensive pairing with Marshall Reeves. So Maple Leafs prospect and Marshall Reeves and him do have a connection together from their days at Harvard University. So potentially, you look at that and could they recapture that magic for the Marlies this year as their top pair potentially, and maybe that kind of sparks something and he could put it all together for Toronto. Because when he was with Harvard, he was putting up some points. He was nearly a point per game player. 7 goals in his last 2 years, in each of the last 2 years, and he had 32 and 33 points respectively in a 35 game season. So nearly point per game when he was playing in college. And I get it, massive difference between the collegiate game and the NHL, but the offense was there from him, and we'll see if he ends up making any impact with the Leafs. I don't see him knocking off anyone that's currently on the team. Like, there's no way that he's going to knock off Simon Benoit, I don't believe, out of that third pair role right now, or OEL or anyone else. But could he be the team's 7th defenseman? Yeah, I could see him being that. Could he be the 8th defenseman? Injuries pile up. Will we see Henry Thrun in a Leafs lineup at some point? I think it's very conceivable that could occur. But at the end of the day, when you look at this trade, it's a minor one. I don't think it's going to have a whole lot of impact for either team. But I think what we can go out and say that it is a win for Toronto, because Thrun will be a far more useful piece than Ryan Reaves at this point in his career. That, at the very least, I am confident in saying. Whether or not he plays legitimate NHL games, whether it's a handful or a lot or a little or none. I still think that he's a better, more useful piece for this organization than a 38-year-old over the hill Ryan Reaves. So I'll chalk it up as a win. I think it's a win-win for both sides. Reeves gets to continue his NHL career. He gets to go to the Sunshine State of California, and Toronto gets a more useful piece to fill out some defensive depth within their organization. So a win-win on both sides. Good on Tree for making that happen and getting that deal done. Still awaiting another big move, though. Would like to see in addition to the top six. I know we've talked about that extensively. There's some rumblings of maybe adding a superstar defenseman. I think Dave and I are going to get into that conversation tomorrow, though. So make sure you subscribe and come back. I think Thursday, rather, we'll have a new episode out. The next episode, we're going to get into those reports that are ongoing right now. Maybe it's a defenseman that the Maple Leafs have their eye on, a certain star offensive defenseman who could power play this quarterback. Just a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge as to who that could possibly be. But again, come back for our next episode, and we'll dive a little bit more into that. To get that done, they might need to add in one of their top prospects in Easton Cowan, who was criminally underranked in a recent top prospects rankings. I'll tell you about that on the other side. And the NHL just continues to trip on their own leg here, puke on themselves. A putrid opening night scheduled for the NHL for October 7th. We'll tell you who they selected and why it was so poorly and horribly done. That's coming up next on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's podcast is brought to you by Indeed. You just need to realize, you just realized that your business need to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored job posts. Put your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidate faster. I've been in that spot where you need the right hire yesterday and the pressure's on, and everybody and every day without the right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs came in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. And now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on right now and support our show by saying you heard about the Indeed on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano riding solo for today's show. Just reacting to the Ryan Reaves trade from last week. And now I want to react to the NHL's disgusting schedule release for opening night. Not sure if everyone has had a chance to check out and see the announcement of the triple header that the NHL is rolling with for opening night, which is Tuesday, October 7th. Still, I can't understand why they don't want to, launch the league on a Saturday hockey night in Canada. But that besides the point, I suppose. The answer that we all know is because the American networks prefer not to do that because of, college football is what is, watched in America on Saturdays. You're not going to do a Sunday because that's the NFL. You're not going to do Wednesday because that's the NBA. So Tuesday nights is the big night for hockey, right? Around the world, I suppose, or North America. But it's not so much the night that bothers me. Start launching the league on a Tuesday. It's the teams they selected to play. First of all, Toronto not playing on opening night. It's the hockey mecca of the universe. It's the best. It's the biggest fan base. They garner the most eyeballs, talking points. I get it. They're not an American market, but they still are the biggest hockey market. And not having them play on opening night is a farce. It is absolutely Just pure stupidity from the league to not have the Maple Leafs taking part in opening night. And this is back-to-back years now where this has been the case. They also do not have the Edmonton Oilers taking part in opening night, which has the best player on the planet in Connor McDavid, not in action being showcased on the opening night of the NHL season. Just really, really bizarre. And they just continue to, the NHL continues to cater to its American audience, and it leaves the much more rambunctious and valuable Canadian crowd kind of behind and leaves them in the dust. And they're like, we'll get to you on Wednesday. And that's apparently when the Maple Leafs will be playing their first game. Reports are that they'll be playing the Montreal Canadiens on Wednesday, October 8th, the next night. So that'll be, 3 years in a row now that the Habs and Leafs square off in the opening game of the season for one another. We'll find out that information tomorrow. So Wednesday, the full schedule is going to be released. But this is the schedule that I'm referring to from opening night that was horrendously chosen. 5 p.m. we start. That's one problem. Why are we starting games at 5 p.m. on opening night? Midday Eastern time too. Midday games. It's ludicrous. And it's the Florida Panthers who every year, the Florida Panthers, they have an opportunity to raise their banner in their own building in front of all their fans on national television. And that's great. They can start on opening night. They're the best team. I have absolutely no qualms with that. But they chose the Chicago Blackhawks as their opponent. Chicago, Florida, 5 p.m. start local time. Why? Why? Like this does not make a whole lot of sense. And I get it. There's a Bedard factor involved here, especially in America, right? Chicago, big market, original six team. They still want Bedard to turn out to be this phenom that he was billed to and marketed as. But I'm not sure he moves the needle quite as much as he did a year or two ago. Certainly not 2 years ago when he first burst onto the scene. And there's no rivalry with Chicago and Florida. It's a cross-conference matchup. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I could think of literally probably 18 other teams that would be a better watch than Chicago and Florida on opening night to open up the NHL regular season. Why, if you want to do cross-conference, give me Edmonton. Give me Edmonton in Florida. Why not start there? Right? Go right back to the well of where things were prior to the off season, right? Get right back at it. 2 straight years these two teams met in the Cup final, and they come back and play each other on night one. I'd be all right with that. I think that'd be a great way to start things off if you're willing to do a cross conference. Or what about maybe doing a rivalry game, huh? The Tampa Bay Lightning, right? Tampa, Florida, that'd have been a great rivalry game to start things off at 5 o'clock. They beat Tampa en route to winning the Stanley Cup. Raise the banner with the rivals in town. That'd be hilarious, right? The Maple Leafs would make a lot of sense too for the exact same reasons. They beat them en route to winning a Stanley Cup. The Florida Panthers are going to absolutely wallop the Blackhawks in this game. It's not even going to be a fair fight. It's not going to be a compelling game. It's I don't know. I'd be really upset if I were the Florida Panthers as well, because I guarantee you, I bet you the Panthers and the banner raising will probably play second fiddle to the storylines heading into this game. It's going to be about what's in store for Bedard in year 3 in the NHL. That's what the storyline's going to be heading into that game. And if I were the Panthers, I'd be a little upset about that, and the fact that they chose Chicago of all teams to square off on opening night. 5 p.m. puck drop, ridiculous. And then it followed by a just as ludicrous matchup between the Pittsburgh Penguins and the New York Rangers is the 8 p.m. primetime game. Neither of these two teams made the playoffs a year ago. Pittsburgh, okay, they got Sidney Crosby. I love Crosby as much as the next guy. But this is an over-the-hill Pittsburgh team that's going nowhere quick. They're still probably going to get a bunch of their players traded between now and the start of the season. And that's a carcass that Vultures are looking to pick at. And who knows what to expect from. This is going to be a strange game. I don't know. I get it. Pittsburgh, New York, divisional rival, I suppose, sure. But that's not the game that I want in prime time, 8 p.m. Just a strange choice once again by the NHL. Yeah, Crosby, you can market him, the Rangers original six, but there has to be a far better choice to make the U.S. TV networks happy better than this Pittsburgh and New York Ranger lineup. I still think that the Habs and Leafs would be a much better one, would go over better in the States than Pittsburgh and New York, but that's just me. And then 10:30 to finish off the triple header. Solid game. I'll give them that. The late night game, you got Colorado at the LA Kings. And the Kings very busy this offseason. So people are going to be excited to see what the Kings can produce out of the gate. And obviously Colorado, Kel McCarr, Nate McKinnon. Like it's you always want to watch the Colorado Avalanche. So that will be a solid game, but it's at 10:30. Like a lot of people on the East Coast aren't probably not going to stay up to watch that game. So the one that's probably going to be the closest game, the most competitive game, the game with the most pace to it, good chance that half of the hockey universe doesn't even stay up to watch it. So that's that. Those are my thoughts on the NHL's schedule release. I still can't understand and believe that they chose Chicago of all teams to be Florida's opponent on night one of the NHL season launch, the first game of the season. Just a crazy thing to do. But anyway, so that's the opening night sked. You got Chicago and Florida at 5 o'clock, Pittsburgh in New York at 8 p.m., and then 10:30 Eastern start, Colorado Avalanche and the LA Kings. No Leafs, no Oilers, big time miss, no Canadian teams in general on opening night. They'll have to wait until the following night on Wednesday, October 8th, to see the Leafs, who again reportedly set to open their season against Les Habitants that night for what'll be, I believe, a third year in a row. So yeah, the full schedule is going to be released tomorrow. So we'll dive deep into it when we release our next show on Thursday, because there is one game that I'm sure a lot of people will be circling for the Maple Leafs, and that's circling when the Vegas Golden Knights are coming to town, and we'll have our first opportunity to lay eyes on Marner in a Golden Knights uniform when he gets into Scotiabank Arena. So that will definitely be a game that I'll be searching for right when the schedule drops. On the other side, Easton Cowan, a top prospect for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but not a top prospect according to Scott Wheeler when it comes to prospects around the league. We'll tell you where he ranked him in the top 100 prospects list next on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned on the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. You got the MLB All-Star Game tonight. Guess what? You can bet it on FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. I'm Mike DiStefano. Dave Morassutti away today dealing with a family matter. He will return tomorrow or for our next podcast on Thursday. And again, the NHL schedule release will be tomorrow on Wednesday. We'll find out the full 82 game schedule for the Maple Leafs, the final 82 game schedule for the foreseeable future as the 26-27 year, obviously, the new CBA kicks in and we move to 84 games at that point. So the final 82 game drop will be tomorrow. And we'll probably come through and do a top five, little top five power ranking, I'd imagine, looking at the top five games that we're looking forward to, that we're circling. So that'll be on Thursday or Friday's podcast later on in the week. But something that kind of caught my eye yesterday when I was on The Athletic, which I'm a big subscriber to The Athletic. I love local and great journalism. And obviously, The Athletic checks all those boxes for me. And Scott Wheeler, who's a friend of the show, he's been on the show a couple of times throughout the what do we know? 6 years, six years into this podcast, I think. And Wheeler's had a handful of appearances, and he put out a top 100 drafted NHL prospect ranking. And I believe to be considered a prospect, Scott Wheeler says a skater must be under 23 and not fully established with his NHL club. And he says the latter qualifier is arbitrary, but he trusts his own judgment, I guess, for whether or not they're considered established or not. So that's kind of where we're at and how he qualifies. The prospects he is ranking. So at the top prospects, he had Matthew Schaefer at number 1, who was just taken with the first overall pick in the draft by the New York Islanders. He came in at number 1. Michael Misa comes in at number 2. Ivan Demidov of the Montreal Canadiens comes in at number 3. And that's kind of where like that qualifier comes into play here. Like Demidov played games in the regular season, played some playoff games, and probably will be a member of this Montreal team moving forward. So he used his judgment there on the Demidov ranking, considering him not quite established yet, despite playing some games for the Montreal Canadiens. But that being said, he still is a top-tier prospect, so I have no qualms with that. That being said, the problem that I do mainly have is how low and how much you have to scroll before you get to the name that we all know and love, and it's the Maple Leafs' number 1 prospect. I'm talking about Easton Cowan. And Easton Cowan coming fresh off a Memorial Cup championship, Memorial Cup MVP, OHL MVP, nearly set records over the last couple of seasons with the London Knights. He was outstanding. And there's a lot of fanfare and a lot of hype over this prospect. Obviously, here in Toronto, sounds like Scott Wheeler wants to kind of temper expectations because he had Easton Cowan ranked as the 48th best prospect that has been drafted by the NHL. 48th best prospect in the league. That's not great. That's not great. Again, there's gonna be some other people who probably have Easton Cowan a lot higher than that. And I mean, when you look at him when he was drafted, Easton Cowan was not a highly ranked prospect out of the gate anyway. So I'm sure a lot of those who scouted him when he was a prospect, getting ready, gearing up for the draft, and he was slotted to be a late 2, early 3rd round pick. They probably still have a lot of similar concerns with this, the undersized, and he's not the best skater, and his puck protection could use a little bit of work. Like, those things going against him would still go against him and still qualify as kind of negatives to his game. But I think you just have to look at what he's been able to do, the production, and the production in big game moments. How that doesn't have you ranked way higher than 48 is beyond me. We might have to get Scott on the show to justify the 48 ranking. And look, there's some really good prospects in the NHL, and I can't tell you exactly where I'd rank Cowan, top 10, top 15, top 20, but I can certainly tell you that I think he should probably be more than far higher than the 48th best prospect in hockey. Like, that just seems way too low for a guy of his caliber, a guy who has had the amount of success that he has had at just 20 years old. I mean, we're talking about back-to-back OHL championships. He's played now twice at the World Juniors for Team Canada. Last year, he had 96 points in 54 games. This year, he had 69 and 46, so the numbers went down a little bit, but the goal scoring was still there. 29 goals in 46 games, probably roughly same in terms of his goal per game output, but it was the playoffs this year that really, really, in my opinion, kind of put him, in pole position to be a top prospect in the NHL. Last year, he had 34 points in 18 playoff games. This year, 39 points, 13 goals in 17 playoff games, leading the Knights to an OHL championship and a CHL championship, becoming Memorial Cup MVP. I mean, you don't do things like that unless you're a great hockey player. And I think that Easton Cowan can be a good hockey player. Do I think that he's like the Mitch Marner replacement? No, I don't. I don't see Cowan as a 100-point player like some people are maybe thinking he could be. I don't think he's that good of a prospect. I don't know if he's a top 10 prospect in hockey, but he, to me, is certainly better than just narrowly inside the top 50. That's kind of where I'm at this point with Easton Cowan. Maybe we'll have to get him on to justify it on the podcast in the next couple of days. But 48, ranked as the 48th best prospect, drafted prospect in the NHL. That certainly caught my eye, and wanted to bring it to everyone's attention on the podcast. We'll get Dave's thoughts on this also when we get back on Thursday for our next show. But I think I'm going to leave it there. That'll do it for me here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave as well at D_Morisuti, and follow the show at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys on Thursday. Again, down to 3 shows a week, but we'll get one out to you guys again on Thursday. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.